Howdy! Welcome to the 91st edition of Drive-Thru Review. Today I'm going to talk to you about Battlestar Galactica Express. Now this is a print and play game, but I was lucky enough to have Andrew Tolson of Print and Play Productions craft this copy for me, so I didn't have to go to all the work to make my copy. This is a sort of riff on the Battlestar Galactica game from Fantasy Flight. It is basically a shorter version of that game. You can easily play this game in less than an hour, even with the full complement of 5 people. It basically distills all of the elements of the game, the Cylons attacking, the betrayal, becoming a Cylon at the beginning of the game, and then maybe becoming a Cylon halfway through the game, and all of those effects and aspects of the game, which I'll show you in a little walkthrough, and really distills it to nice bite-sized chunks, while still, I think, maintaining the spirit of the game wholeheartedly. So let's take a look at it, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what I think. Okay, so here's what's going to come with the game. You're going to get this main board here. You're going to get a whole mess of dice, red, blue dice, and these sort of crisis dice here in black. You've got this center sort of emblem here. These are where players will submit their dice and then get them back if they pass, or it becomes their turn. They'll grab all their dice back from whatever portion of this emblem is theirs. You've got Galactica over here, and you can see you've got spaces where Galactica is going to take damage. When it takes damage, you're going to draw one of these tiles, and it's going to, you can put it here somewhere, and it's going to have some effect on the game against the good guys, the guys that are not Cylons. Here is a stack of tiles which are morale markers, and these are going to depict different characters in the game and basically hinder those characters until the good guys find a way to dispose of this marker and return it back to the draw pile. Over here you've got your DRADIS display, basically your radar. The game's going to start off with 2 raiders in the radar here. And throughout the turn you may have some crisis where more raiders will show up. You're going to draw from this pile of face down markers here. Sometimes you may get a colonial ship like so, and you're going to either wanting to be destroying these raiders or rescuing the colonial ships. Now the bottom left here is probably the most important part of the board. This is the FTL marker on the left as well as the jump track here. Basically what's going to happen in the game is this FTL marker is going to progress and get to the final space, and the crew is going to jump. And you're going to roll a die and then figure out how many spaces this is going to jump. And the good guys are going to win if this is on the 6th, basically the final jumps track, and then this FTL thing progresses again, and then you do sort of a final jump and basically escape the evil Cylons. Now the Cylons will win if ever this DRADIS radar display here is filled with all raiders. So there's 6 spots. If all 6 of those are raiders, Cylons instantly win. Another way the Cylons can win is if all of these morale markers are face up for each of the characters in the game. Basically the crew has lost all morale and all hope, and the Cylons win. The last way that the Cylons win is if Battlestar Galactica gets so damaged that all of these spots are filled up, and once that happens, the Cylons also will win. So there's basically 3 ways for the Cylons to win, and 1 way for the humans to win, basically to jump and get away from the Cylons. So to start the game, you're going to randomly or choose to pick out a character. So there's all 5 characters here, so in a 5-player game you'll pass all of these out. And then the highest ranking character, in this case would be Admiral Adama, will get this Admiral card, which gives them a special ability. And you can see all of these cards have a little special ability that the player can take on their turn. Also at the beginning of the game, you're going to shuffle in a certain amount of these Cylon cards with a bunch of these You Are Not a Cylon cards. So you're going to take and shuffle all of these up and then deal them out to all the players. And then you're going to have a certain amount left over that you're going to deal out again once the jump track gets past this little red marker here. So there may not be any Cylons at the beginning of the game in the first few rounds, but there's definitely going to be at least 1 or 2 Cylons after this marker here happens. So needless to say, if you're a Cylon or not a Cylon, that has to remain secret throughout the game, and you basically have to sort of suss out who the Cylon is if you're the good guy, and prevent them from achieving any one of these 3 victories. And then if you're the Cylon, you're trying to prevent the humans from jumping away and getting away from your fleet. So each player is going to get 2 blue die and 2 red die. And there's a lot of negatives on here. You can see that's -2, and there's also positives, +3. Now the blues have +4, so they're sort of your stronger die, and these red ones are sort of your weaker dice. And what you're going to be doing most of the time on your turn is rolling these dice in secret, and then rolling them and then taking a look at them, and then always submitting at least one die, depending on what action you're trying to take, to affect the outcome. So you can see obviously the negative die will have sort of a negative effect on the outcome, whereas a positive die is going to have a positive effect. Now the thing to keep in mind with this is the Cylons will mostly want to submit negative die, but they also don't want to give away that they're the Cylon. So since there's more negative on these die, you can get away with sort of rolling the die and saying, oh shoot, I guess the best die I can give you is a -2. Everybody's going to think you're a Cylon, but you can beg and plead and say, no, I just got unlucky and rolled bad dice. But that's the whole crux of the game right there. So your turn is going to be very simple. You're basically going to take one action, roll some dice to see the outcome of the action, and then you're going to roll some of these crisis dice. Now there's two sets of crisis dice. There's one set for a 4-player game, and then the other set of crisis dice is for a 3- or 5-player game. So you're going to take your action, roll the dice, and then you're going to roll these crisis dice, put those face down, and then keep them hidden, and then choose one. And that'll be one crisis that the whole team has to either try to beat, or if you're a Cylon, you're trying to sabotage the outcome of the crisis. So before we talk about the crisis, let's talk about some of the different actions you can do. So the first thing I might do is try to get rid of some of these raiders. So I'm going to roll the dice here. I'm going to show you what I'm rolling. And if I were a good guy, then I would submit any positive die. And for each positive die, I can remove a raider. Or if it was a colonial ship, I can remove that back to the draw pile, basically rescuing that colonial ship. The next thing I might try to do is boost morale. So if this was up here and I had a Dama up there, I'd try to roll to remove that, roll all my dice, and then in this case I got all negatives, so it would basically fail. I couldn't do anything, so that would just be a failed action. But if I got a positive, I'd be able to remove this, put it back into the draw pile. Next is repairing Galactica, and it's the same thing. You roll your die, if you have a positive, you submit it, and if I had this marker here, then I would fix this area of Galactica and put it back. Now the thing to keep in mind when you roll these die is when you roll this, and let's say I submitted this die here for one of my actions, I'm going to submit it, and then it's going to move down to this little leather area here, and I'm going to be down a die for the remainder of my turn until basically I get around to me again or I pass on somebody else's turn. That'll become more clear in a second. So as you lose dice, it's going to become easier if you're Cylon to say, hey, all I rolled was negatives. Now the next thing you might do is call a vote. If you think somebody is a Cylon, you basically want to try to throw them in the brig to sort of gimp the options that they have on their turn. And if you ever get thrown in the brig, you just flip that over and it shows that you're in the brig. Now there's certain abilities and actions that you can't do while you're in the brig, and you also only get to retrieve one die when you pass or it becomes your turn. So it really hampers what you can do. Now to vote somebody in the brig, you're basically going to roll against a 4. So I'm going to vote, and then everybody's going to take turns either passing or rolling. So if I choose to roll, I'm going to roll all the die, and I have to submit at least one. So in this case, I rolled a +3. Now what you're rolling against is a 4. So after all the players have either passed or rolled, the total of the dice needs to be 4. So I submit a +3. Maybe Billy over here, he rolls, and then he's a Cylon, so he got a +1, but he's actually going to submit a -1, so now we're at 2. Now Frank over here, he's going to pass. Maybe he doesn't have very many die to roll, or he's a Cylon, or he just doesn't feel like rolling his dice. So if we get all the way around and we equal 4 or greater with the total of everybody's die, then the vote's going to pass and the player's going to go in the brig. Now you can also do the same thing to get somebody out of the brig. If you really don't think they're a Cylon, the Cylons have tricked you, you can do the same vote, rolling against 4, and then he can come out of the brig. Now the next action you can do, and I haven't seen anybody actually do this, but you can actually just put a die in there without rolling it, issuing an executive order. Anybody can do this. You don't have to be the admiral to do this. Issue an executive order, and I say, Frank, I want you to take an action to maybe repair Galactica. Now Frank can do it or he cannot do it. He could pass if he wants, and when you pass, except when you call a vote, but if you pass, then you can take all dice back. So now you've got some more dice to roll while it's the other player's turns. But if he does what you want, then he would basically take whatever action he wanted, or the one you wanted, and then he would go from there. But I haven't seen anybody actually use the executive order. Just maybe in the nature of the games we played. Now real quickly, one of the last actions you can do is do a jump prep. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about jumping in a second, but basically you're going to ensure that you're going to move the FTL marker up. And what you do is you roll, and you have to submit 2 dice in this case, and the total value of it has to be positive. So we just like to turn that up and say, okay, we're for sure going to progress this marker on the turn. But there's a little bit more involved to that, which I'll talk about in a second. Finally, each of the characters has a special ability that they can do on their turn instead of one of these other actions. So you can see Balter has, once per game, you may look at another player's loyalty card. And those are the You Are Not a Cylon or possibly Cylon cards. So each of these people has a little ability that they can do on their turn instead of the other actions. And then whoever has the Admiral has a special action, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Finally, if you're a Cylon, instead of doing one of your actions, you can actually reveal your Cylon card and take that action. Now, if you were in the brig and you revealed, you would basically just come out of the brig and you would waste this ability here, because this ability only happens when you reveal as a Cylon. And these are pretty devastating, so you want to pick and choose wisely what's going to happen when you do this, because your turns are going to be a sort of gimped. You're going to have a lot of constraints put on you, but it's usually a good idea to do this sort of maybe towards the middle end of the game when you can have a nice impact on a maybe already damaged Galactica or already morale deficient crew. So as I said, after you take your action, you're going to roll 2 crisis dice and then submit one of them. So let me talk a little bit about these. So there's a bunch of different symbols on these crisis die, and that basically means this is a crisis that the whole crew as a group is going to have to face. So if you can see this, I've got a fist here. Well, the fist basically means we're going to have to combat a morale marker. So you're going to draw a morale marker if you fail this. So you're going to roll against a 4, and similar to a vote, everybody's going to go around and either roll or pass. Now, unlike a vote, when you pass, you'll be able to take all the dice back that you have so you can use on future crisis on future turns. So if you equal 4 or greater, then you defeat the crisis and you don't draw one of these markers. However, if you fail, you can see here maybe in the red that you're going to draw 2 of the markers. So this is the result you're trying to meet, and this is the outcome. And here's another crisis. You see it's a battle star, and so, or base star, excuse me. And this basically means you're going to have to roll against something damaging Galactica. So you have to roll against a 7. If you fail, you only draw 1 marker and put that on Galactica. Now, some of these crises have a jump symbol on there. And this is going to basically mean that you are going to jump this turn. And it doesn't matter if you pass or fail the crisis, you're still going to jump. Now, when I say jump, I don't mean actually jumping quite yet. I mean you're going to advance the FTL here. So before, when I said you can roll as your action to prep this, you basically ensure that you got one of these markers on the die. It's as if the marker had appeared even if it wasn't on there. Now if you do get one of these and you didn't prep, you're still going to push this forward. So every time you get one of those markers on your crisis die or you prep for that turn, this is going to progress. Now when this hits the jump marker here, after you've battled the crisis and the jump marker's moved here, then you're going to roll 2 die. And that's where the Admiral come in. So whoever has the Admiral card is going to roll a strong and a weak die. They're going to roll them both. And so you're going to look at the numbers on here. Now in this case, they're both negative. So the Admiral's going to choose one of these to submit. And you're going to move the number of spaces of the die that you submit, whether it's negative or not. Now if it was positive, let's say I submitted a positive 2, then I'm just basically going to move this 2 spaces, and that's it. We've gotten a little bit further away. Now if it's negative, you still move 2 spaces in this case, but then you're going to have a negative outcome. And the Admiral has to decide basically this number of crises that you have to enact, and they're going to happen no matter what. So if I chose the 2, I'd have to choose 2 of 2 different crises. And what you have to do is you have to either choose 2 morales in this case, or 2 Battlestar Galactica damages, or 1 of each. It's got a total 2, but it's got to be only from the morale or the damage on the ship here. Now let's talk a little bit about morale. Now if Adama has the morale marker face up and that crisis has not been handled by one of the players, then whenever he passes, he's only going to be able to take 1 die back on the start of his turn or when he passes, during a crisis roll. So that is horrendous, because you want as many dice as you can, because remember there's more negatives on these dice than there are positive. So that's going to be a big time hurting on Adama there. Now the same thing applies if you're in the brig. You can only take 1 die back when you pass or at the start of your turn. As well, being brigged, it doesn't allow you to repair Galactica or go after the Dratus markers or anything like that, so it's also a big time hurting. And one of my favorite parts of the game, and probably the most effective for the Cylons, is some of these markers here when they damage Galactica. So a lot of these are going to prevent different actions. So this one says you cannot call a vote. So while that's up, no player can take the vote action for their turn. And this one, for example, you cannot ensure a jump prep, which can also hurt the players greatly because they cannot ensure that they're going to jump, you know, every turn if they really wanted to. Now finally, just the last note here about the Cylons is on the turn that they reveal as a Cylon, you can't do any other actions. That basically ends their turn. So it either gets them out of the brig or they execute this nasty effect. After that, they only have 2 dice to submit on their turn. So they're obviously going to be submitting only negative die, but they only have 2 dice to do that with. And you can't throw a Cylon on the brig. A revealed Cylon basically has escaped the ship, and he's sort of, you know, influencing the whole game negatively from a faraway place. And then the Cylon can either choose to roll 2 of these crisis die, or they can pick a crisis, maybe one that is almost, you know, full up, like if Galactica is really damaged, they can say, okay, let's roll against Galactica of a 4. So they just pick the number 4, and they say, this is the crisis that's going to happen. Everybody's got to roll or pass and try to meet the 4 for whatever crisis the Cylon has picked. Okay, hope you enjoyed the overview. Alright, so the consensus, I think, with my group, I don't know if it's unanimous, but it's close. They like this better than the Battlestar Galactica board game. They also like it better than the Resistance, which we've been playing quite a bit of recently as well. Now that's not to say they don't like these other games. We've actually had a good time with Resistance recently, and that's quite a fun game. Very distilled, and you can play it like in 20 minutes, especially if you only have 5 or 6 people. This plays in a good 45 minutes to about an hour. Now the one thing that I think people will have a problem with is rolling the dice to see how far that you move the jump marker. Because if you roll 4 and your Cylon, or your Admiral is not a Cylon, then he's going to move that along pretty quickly. And so the Cylons are going to have to really be pretty aggressive, I think. So we found that being more aggressive is really sort of key, especially if you're a Cylon early. But it's real tricky because you can't be too aggressive right at the beginning, but you don't want to really be helpful either. That's no fun. So the game can be over pretty quick, but I think that's by design. The game, you don't want to basically move, you know, one spot each time, because then the game would definitely drag over an hour, probably into the hour-and-a-half range, which may or may not be fine for players, but I think this keeps the game fast, intense. You know, you've got to be on your toes. And remember, you're going to be dealing those Cylon cards out again after the 4th jump. So now I've only played this with a full boat of 5, and my suspicion is playing with 3. You know, it's 3 people. You want a full boat with this game, I would think. So it might work fine with 3 or 4, but I've only played it with 5, and it's a blast with 5. I mean, it's amazing. You know, I've played the original game and stuff, and honestly, I think they should pick this up. Final Fantasy Flight should pick this up. You know, just do the components up nice. I would totally buy this if it was you picked. I mean, I already have it, so maybe I wouldn't, but you know, I probably would. Just let me just say it now that I would buy it because it's an amazing experience. It's just so distilled down. You've got the whole sort of like, I don't know if it's Liar's Dice or whatever. It's kind of like Liar's Dice, where you say, you know, oh, you only had this dice or whatever, and it really distills that down to very fun. And it's just right off the bat, everybody gets right into it. If you like the board game, the original game, I think you'll definitely like this game. And if you didn't like that game, then you probably wouldn't like this anyway. But it's really quick, really fast paced. I mean, it's the whole experience. And it's not super light, but the game is very simple. You roll dice for an action, and then you resolve a crisis. And it goes around and around and around. And then the Cylons decide, okay, it's time to screw you guys over, and they reveal themselves, and that's it. So all of the fiddle-faddle, and I don't really find the basic game, the board game, to be very fiddly. I know some people do. But it really gets rid of any discussion about that. There's no fiddle. You've got a couple actions you can do. You go, okay, well, there's a lot of damage on Galactica. Let's do that. Or Bill and Frank are both demoralized. They're only pulling 1 dice back at a time. And they're getting screwed, and they're not helping us with our crisis. And so you just pick the action and go. And then you roll a crisis, and you go. And then everybody goes, oh, you're Cylon. You submitted a -2. And you say, no, I'm not. You know how the game goes. So if you can print yourself out a copy, go for it. If you find somebody to make you a nice copy like I did, Andrew did an amazing job. I mean, the art is amazing. I can't say enough. It's a print and play game. It's amazing. All right. Enjoy. Please get it. it's great. Thanks.